When you reach that point in your life where you look at the results you're living with and something inside you whispers, I can't keep doing this, that's the spark. That's the moment where your life begins to shift, even if the world around you doesn't notice yet. Because nothing in your outer world can truly transform until you change the story you're carrying inside. And most people are living in stories that were built out of fear, built out of past pain, built out of the beliefs of people who didn't know their own power, let alone yours. You keep replaying those stories, telling yourself why you can't, why you shouldn't, why it's too late, why it won't work. And with every repetition, the story becomes your reality. Not because it's true, but because you've practiced believing it. Your life changes the moment you refuse to tolerate that old story. The moment you stop giving it authority over your decisions. The moment you stop letting the past dictate your future. People underestimate how much power they've handed over to narratives that were never theirs to begin with. It's not the world that is holding them back. It's the script they keep reciting, the script they never question. A story of limitation, of this is just who I am, of life has always been this way, of nothing ever works out for me. That story becomes the cage. You decorate it, you adjust to it, you get comfortable in it, and eventually you forget it's a cage at all. You start calling it reality, but it's not reality, it's a choice. A repeated choice, a familiar pattern, a psychological home that feels safe because it's known, even if it's miserable. And what most people don't see is that toleration is one of the most dangerous forces in human psychology. Because whatever you tolerate, you will live. Whatever you accept, you reinforce. Whatever you allow, you strengthen. Your old story survives because you've learned to tolerate it. You've learned to live with the excuses. You've learned to live with the fears. You've learned to live with the beliefs that shrink you. That tolerance becomes the ceiling over your growth. And every day you live under that ceiling, you forget a little more that you're the one holding it up. But there comes a moment, a breaking point, a truth point, where you can't tolerate your old story one more day. Where you wake up and realize you've been negotiating with your limitations, giving them permission to stay. And something inside you gets louder than your excuses. Something inside you stands up. Something inside you refuses to go another day living in a narrative that suffocates your potential. That moment is the birth of real change. Because change doesn't start with action, it starts with refusal. A refusal to stay who you've been. A refusal to keep repeating what has never served you. A refusal to let the patterns of your past define the possibilities of your future. When you reach that moment of refusal, the emotional weight you've been carrying begins to shift. You stop blaming your circumstances and start claiming your power. You stop waiting for something external to shift and start realizing the shift has to begin internally. You stop looking at what's wrong and start focusing on what's possible. That emotional pivot is the catalyst for every transformation a human being has ever made. Because the story you tolerate becomes the life you live. And the moment you refuse to tolerate it, you create space for a new identity, a new mindset, a new direction. You begin to speak to yourself differently. You begin to make decisions from a place of strength rather than fear. You begin to act in alignment with the life you actually want, not the one you've been settling for. And what's incredible is that the world responds to your internal shift. Opportunities you never saw before begin to appear. People treat you differently because you show up differently. Challenges that once overwhelmed you now feel manageable because you've reclaimed your agency. Everything you want begins with reclaiming the authorship of your story. And that authorship begins when you decide your old narrative is no longer acceptable. People think freedom comes from changing the world around them. But real freedom comes from changing the world inside you, from rewriting the story that tells you who you are and what is possible for you, from stepping out of the familiar prison of limitation and stepping into the unfamiliar territory of growth, uncertainty, courage, and expansion. It is uncomfortable at first because the old story feels safe. It feels predictable. It feels like home, even when it hurts. But once you take that first emotional step away from it, once you refuse to keep repeating the same narrative, you open the door to a life that is built on choice rather than conditioning. And that's the moment transformation begins, not because the world got easier, but because you became stronger. You've stopped living in a story that was never meant to define you, and you started building one that reflects your true potential, your true identity, your true power. Lasting transformation has nothing to do with motivation, because motivation is a temporary spark. It rises, it falls, it fades the moment life gets difficult. If your entire future depends on whether you feel motivated, you're already setting yourself up to stay stuck. Motivation is a mood. Decision is a foundation. Motivation is a feeling. Decision is a commitment. Motivation comes from the outside. Decision comes from within. And real, lasting change that rewires your identity, reshapes your habits, and elevates your entire direction begins only when you make a decision that leaves no space for retreat. People think they need motivation to begin. They wait for the perfect day, the perfect energy, the perfect alignment of their emotions. But that's not how transformation works. Your life doesn't change when you feel ready. It changes when you choose to step forward even while you're scared, uncertain, uncomfortable, or exhausted. It changes when you say, I'm doing this regardless of how I feel. That is the moment you take back your power from your emotions and give it to your commitment. That's the moment your nervous system understands that this isn't a temporary wish. This is who you're becoming. A real decision is not made in your mind, it's made in your body. It's a full emotional shift where you burn the bridges to your old life. It requires something deeper than a thought. It requires a level of certainty so strong that your mind stops debating whether or not you should move forward. The problem is most people don't decide. They prefer to try. They test the waters. They dabble. They take half steps with escape routes built into every attempt. They say they want change, but they keep the back door open just in case it gets hard. And because of that, they never access the energy, the clarity, the intensity that transformation demands. When you make a true decision, you eliminate the internal conflict. You stop negotiating with your excuses. You stop indulging the stories that have kept you trapped. The moment you decide fully and without hesitation, your brain reorganizes itself around that choice. Your focus sharpens. Your priorities shift. Your stress decreases because you're no longer caught between the desire for change and the fear of change. You're all in. And when you're all in, life begins to move with you rather than against you. But to reach that level of commitment, you must get honest with yourself. You have to ask, have I really decided or have I just been hoping? Hope is passive. Decision is active. Hope waits for circumstances to improve. Decision creates new circumstances. Hope wants guarantees. Decision builds certainty through action, not reassurance. And the moment you stop relying on emotional highs and commit through decision, you step into a different version of yourself. The version that takes control instead of waiting for inspiration. The truth is, most people don't lack effort. They lack certainty. They take action while doubting themselves. They set goals while questioning whether they can achieve them. They make promises they don't emotionally believe. But when decision happens at a deep enough level, doubt loses its power. It becomes background noise rather than a barrier. You move forward not because you're fearless, but because fear no longer gets a vote. That is the beauty of a full decision. You don't need constant bravery. You only need to choose once wholeheartedly and then follow through. Think about the times in your life where you truly decided something. You didn't drift. You didn't second guess. You didn't ask for permission. You moved with certainty. You acted with clarity. You followed through because the decision had already been made. That is the level of emotional intensity that creates breakthroughs. Not the days where you felt motivated, but the days where you acted from commitment. When you acted because the choice was made long before the moment arrived. When you operate from decision rather than motivation, your internal source of power changes. You no longer depend on circumstances or moods. You don't wait for the right timing because you've already chosen the direction. You don't stop when challenges appear because you knew challenges would come and you decided anyway. You don't shrink when things get uncomfortable because discomfort is part of the path you already accepted. The decision becomes your anchor, your fuel, your structure. And this is where transformation becomes inevitable, because decision creates consistency. Consistency creates momentum. Momentum creates identity. And identity is what locks your transformation into place. Once your identity shifts, once you begin to think, act, and respond as the person you committed to becoming, your old patterns no longer feel natural. In fact, they feel out of alignment with who you now believe yourself to be. That identity pool is stronger than motivation could ever be. Motivation says, do it when you feel like it. Identity says, do it because this is who you are. When you reach that stage, change doesn't require force. It becomes your new baseline. It becomes the natural expression of a decision you made so powerfully that the old you couldn't survive it. That is the level of inner certainty that transforms lives, careers, relationships, habits, and futures. Motivation might get you started, but decision is what carries you through the moments that separate those who dream from those who rise.